This is Radio TV Phononut, and we have a Montgomery Ward Signature Jr. little kitty phonograph from the mid to late 60s. This is a one-tube wonder model, probably one of the later ones, although I've seen these made as recent as 1970, 71, and I know some of the school phonographs continue to use tubes for, at least into the mid-70s. And magnified this fine print in the lid, and it says it was made by Vanity Fair Electronics. And Vanity Fair, as some of you may know, had kitty phonographs up into the 1980s. They were around from the 50s, at least through the 80s. This your typical 4-speed variety, plastic clatter, plastic tone arm with a single tip LP stylus. Has the usual typical problems. Motor froze up, probably a bad cartridge, bad filter hum, so pretty much this phonograph's going to need everything. But you know, I'm not going to use brand new parts that I have actual money in to fix this. Is this thing going to warm up? Maybe it's not going to warm up. Well, anyway, I've already peeked into this, and somebody did a very... there it comes. Yeah, as you can hear, it has a bad filter capacitor and no platter rotation. The motor's froze up. Feels like the cartridge is bad. Not getting any kind of click from the amplifier. Now I've already peeked into this, and somebody did a very sloppy repair job on it. It seems the selenium rectifier went up in smoke, and somebody did a very down and dirty repair job at installing a silicon rectifier. Well, I'm going to do a down and dirty repair job when I fix this, because I'm not using my new parts in this. I'm going to use stuff that I salvage from other things. Of course, it'll still be reliable, but we're just not going to invest the money in new parts for this. And the reason for that is even though this is in decent cosmetic shape, it's still a cheap one-tube wonder kitty record player. And if I ever put this on eBay to sell it, it's probably not going to bring that much, and you know I don't like losing money. Like I've said before, this is a hobby, and I'm not trying to make a killing at it, but I would at least like to regain my investment, and I can't do that if we go hog wild on installing new parts in this thing, including cartridges, etc. Okay, here's the amplifier with the cover removed, and you can see all the blackened area here. That's where this original orange selenium rectifier shorted out and blew up the fusible resistor. You can see what they did. They installed a new resistor. Here's our silicon diode, and they just cut into the filter capacitor positive lead here and soldered it on that way. So we're going to need to make that a little bit more, going to have to make that a little neater, and this filter capacitor may or may not be original. I don't know. It's fixing to be gone anyway. And yeah, that filter capacitor is not original. Number one, it looks much older than the record player, and you can see where they spliced it on here. They didn't even bother to unsolder the old one from the ground terminal here. They just simply spliced onto it, didn't even bother to tape the lead up. Probably whoever did this was doing what I'm about to do, just trying to get it to work as cheaply and as quickly and as effortlessly as possible. Well, I am going to go to a little more effort. I at least want it to be safe. And here's something you've never seen before. This is my used part stash. Most of these parts came out of televisions and other pieces of electronics that I EOL'd, and I just threw them all in here. It's mainly capacitors and some solid-state devices. Back when I fixed a lot of televisions, I'd keep the chassis out of them, and when I needed a part to fix something else, I'd just go grab it off of one of those old TV circuit boards. But, well, then when everybody decided they had to have a flat screen TV, and when an old CRT set became worth under $10, I decided it wasn't even worth my while to fool with them anymore. So what few old TV circuit boards I had left, I just ripped what parts I could use off of them and threw them in here, and that's the reason they're in here. So when I get an item like this record player that I don't really want to spend any money on, I can just reach in my parts bin and come up with something. And here we go, a 47 and a 33, both at 250 volts. Now with these having shorter than normal leads, we're going to have to add a little something to that and heat shrink them up real good, but we're going to make these work. Okay, it's starting to take shape. We have our negatives tied together and 100% insulated with heat shrink tubing. When we connect our negative wire from the chassis here, we'll slide some heat shrink over it to insulate that, as we will these two positive terminals, so there won't be any chance of this shorting out to anything. Okay, here we are, the filter capacitors in place, and I have the leads insulated where they were spliced into. There's no chance of anything shorting out. This big capacitor here is the isolation cap. I just replaced that out of one from my junk too, a 1600 volt rated cap. That one ought to be stout enough. Okay, let's run the smoke test and see what happens. Let it warm up. Alright, it's warmed up and I'm not getting anything from the cartridge, so let's disconnect the cartridge and see if the amp is working. Well, the amp is working, so it's indeed this cartridge that's defective. This is one of those Varco 3-volt crystal cartridges that was very common in kiddie record players from the mid-60s on up through the mid-70s. And it's no surprise that it's dead. I mean, I've seen some that were still good, but this one, unfortunately, isn't one of them. Now, I'm sure I could track down a replacement for $30 or $40, but frankly, the record player is probably not worth that much. So most likely what's going to happen is this is going to get a lower output Crosley cartridge glued into the head shell, and yes, it will be lower output than normal, but we'll just have to live with that, because after all, this is just a kiddie record player. This is not something that's made to fill your whole house with sound. If you want something to fill your whole house with sound, then buy something better. This here is more of a novelty than anything else. Yeah, Varco SNH45, made in Japan. And back in the day, you could buy this whole tone arm and cartridge for a couple of dollars, and some of these tone arms had the flipper knob on the front where you could flip from LP to 78, which is what I'd really rather have. I think if something's going to have a 78 RPM setting, it should have the proper needle for it, but by the time this was made, they probably figured the only 78s that would be played were the little small micro groove kiddie records. They didn't probably figure anybody'd play any of the old wide groove shellac records on it. Okay, I looked on eBay, and as you might expect, no identical cartridge found. You'd think as many of those that were used in kiddie phonographs over the years that they'd still be all over the place, but I guess not. There were some that could be used as a replacement. With $65, $75, $85, $95, they're dreaming. So we're not going to go that route. We're going to go the modern route. And what you see in this bag here is a bunch of the tall 1/2-inch cartridge mounts, like what go with the Chiuo-Denshi Crosley cartridges and the Fansteel P226 and 228 cartridges. I got the whole bag of them off of eBay for little or nothing, which means now I can order the mountless Crosley cartridges from China and have a mount to clip them to. Well, included in the lot was one Crosley cartridge, so we're going to try to stick it in here. Okay, I have this temporarily connected to one channel. I'm going to have to bridge this for mono, but with it wide open, I get a fair tick in the speaker, nothing earth-shattering, but it will play a record. Okay, here's our mount. Unfortunately, it was too wide to just slide up into the tone arm, so I just melted the plastic down, trial and error method, until it got to where I could fit it in the tone arm, and now it's so tight that the friction will hold it in there. So now all we have to do is bridge our cartridge wires for mono and put the cartridge in here, and hopefully the electronic portion of this will be complete. Okay, we've got, and that skipping is this stutter and turntable platter. It's got good tonal quality, but no volume to speak of. We're going to have to try to do a little something to that amp to give it a little more bump, but you see how that turntable platter is. That's because of dried grease in the spindle bearing. Okay, I took the platter off and it looks fairly clean under here, but it still needs to be lubricated. This is froze tight as a drum. We need to pull our idler wheel off and clean it with rubber renew, and if it turns out to have a bump in it, it's just going to have a bump in it, because I'm not spending $30 on a idler wheel rebuild for this. Not unless somebody signs a contract saying they're going to give me a few $100 for this, and if they do that, I'll do a super duper job at getting it working well. But I don't think anybody's going to do that, so we're just going to do the bare minimum here. And here's the motor removed. I've already cleaned and lubricated the rest of this. And this is an Alliance motor. You can tell by the smooth bushing assembly here on the bottom. The General Industries motors usually have a big GI symbol on them, but we're not going to tug on this to try to get it apart, because like I've mentioned before, these are bad about seizing to the bushing. And if you try to tug and pull on this, you're going to pull the whole bushing out of this little assembly here, and if that happens, you're screwed. So we're going to apply some heat to this to try to free it up, and then we'll gently slide this off of here. And here we are. I was able to successfully get it out without damaging anything. And you can see how this is held together. This around here is your felt wick where the oil is applied, which is bone dry now. And these little fingers here hold this bushing in place. What happens if this seizes to the motor shaft and you go pulling and tugging on here, you're going to pull this bushing out of here. And once you get it out, there's no getting it back in. You'll either have to find another motor or find a junk motor that this bushing assembly is still intact. So we're now going to clean all this up with our Q-tip and alcohol. Technically, we should soak this in something like lighter fluid overnight, but I think I can clean it thoroughly enough with alcohol to get it to run. Clean our shaft, take this out, clean it as best we can. Now, this usually doesn't seize up here at the top like this at the bottom does. And you can see the brown crud that came off of the motor shaft, the bottom portion of the motor shaft. Alright, here's the bottom part lubricated. We saturated the wick as well as put a couple of drops into the bearing itself. And we've done the same to the top portions. We're about ready to put it all back together and hope it runs. And as you're putting your motor back in and tightening the bolts, you want to tap on it with the butt end of a screwdriver or a rubber mallet to align the bearings. When you put it all back together, your rotor should spin very freely. If it does not, or if it binds up, that means your bearings are not lined up properly. Alright, the motor is running like a top, but before we put the idler wheel back on, I want to clean the shaft with a paper towel moistened in alcohol. That's the 90% variety that you buy at the drugstore, not the kind you consume. Figure most people already know that, but if there's some people from my area watching this, they may have to be reminded. Alright, that's much better when I spin it by hand. No wobbly, jerky crap. And yes, that wheel has a little dent in it, but it's not too terribly bad, and like I said, we're not going to worry about it. That's what happens when you don't leave the speed lever in neutral when you're done with it. And we got plenty of torque. Let's get a 45 and see what it sounds like. Yeah, it's okay, but you have to turn it wide open to hear it.
I'm sorry, my angel cries, and if I ever get by.
But you have to consider the original cartridge was 3 volts. The one in here is 0.3 volts. So basically we're getting, this cartridge puts out about 1/10 of what the original put out. Now I have to decide, do I want to put an FET preamp stage in this thing or just let it go? I think it'll have a decent sound, but do I want to put that much effort into this? I did some more looking on eBay and I found some cartridges that would work in this, but $29.95, I realize that's cheaper than some of the ones I saw yesterday, but still, I don't even know if it's even worth putting that into this or not. At least with the cartridge that's in here, it will play a wider variety of records without skipping. The old Varco crystal cartridge is not very compliant with newer records. Alright, there it is back together. You have to turn it all the way up to really get any enjoyment out of it, and preferably with higher modulated older 45s, but it works as good as I'm going to worry about it right now. Yes, I could get better out of it, but like I've just discussed already, we're looking at dollars and cents here. And I'm not going to invest dollars and cents and lots of labor that I can't get out of this thing. So, if you want it like it sits, it's $25. And yes, it has a little dent in the idler wheel, but I'm not worried about that either. I'll include the old cartridge and the mounting screw in case you want to spend the $30 on a new one. And if you want to order an idler wheel for it, I think it's about $30, so you see why we're not doing this for myself. We're already at about $60 plus shipping if I were to order those parts.
Come on, angel, my heart's on fire, wings and legs.
For some reason, I just never could get into that record. Don't know why, but just couldn't really get into it.
Tomorrow you'll be different, I'm hoping.
And there it is with a 78, although it would do better if it had the
everything's alright.
proper 78 needle in it, but there again, if you want one, you can order one. Or you can order the P228 cartridge that has a flip needle and just install it in the clip that's already there. Okay, there you go. If you want this thing, it's available. If not, then I'll probably end up scrapping it for parts to fix something else. The case is in pretty good shape. There is a scrape here on the motor board where it looks like somebody drugged the needle across it, but it's in a lot better shape cosmetically than many of these that I find. But yeah, it just really galls me what people want for parts these days, like $30 for this cartridge, and back in the day you could buy the whole tone arm and cartridge for a couple of bucks. But yet people expect to get these things for $15 in fully functioning like new condition. Well, sorry to tell you, but that's likely not going to happen. So if you want cheap, cheap is what you get. Something that's fixed from parts from the scrap pile in a cheapy 0.3 volt cartridge as opposed to an original 3 volt cartridge that came in here.